No, I don't.
Okay. We'll start with Matt in Michigan. Thanks for waiting. You're on with Don and Matt.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Matt.
Not bad.
Hi. Okay, so last time I called in, we had a brief interaction, and you suggested that I do a little reading on epistemology.
Yeah.
And then, so I did that, and then I had some questions for you as it relates to applying your epistemology to the study of the New Testament.
Okay.
Okay, so as I understood it from the brief amount of reading that I did, that there are like different divisions of epistemology, including a priori, like understanding, like rational inductive reasoning, and also a posteriori, which is like scientific, like repeatable kind of demonstrations where you can learn by experience.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. So last time I called also, you mentioned that it would be, so I think we were a little bit, we were talking past each other a little bit because I was getting hung up on the idea of calling the resurrection a miracle, and that implying causation, I think, was causing a little bit of confusion. And so now I would like to try to understand what kind of epistemology, like how you came to the conclusion that the New Testament is not trustworthy or that the resurrection didn't happen, like how you applied your epistemology to that subject.
So I haven't reached the conclusion that a resurrection didn't happen. My position is that...
What makes you think that it isn't credible?
Because we have a claim that we cannot investigate. That is from a source that we cannot investigate or interrogate or identify. And the claim is of an extraordinary nature. And the evidence supporting it, which is basically just claims and anecdotal, is not extraordinary. And so there needs to be a degree of quality and quantity of evidence that is commensurate to the degree of extraordinariness of the claim. For example, if somebody says, hey, I got a new puppy, that's an especially mundane claim because I am already aware and can confirm that dogs exist and puppies exist and people hold them as pets. I've had puppies myself. Other people I know have had puppies, et cetera. If somebody says we'll go with the common example, an invisible pink unicorn. Now, the nature of the claim is such that I would need more evidence than merely accepting their word for it. And by the way, even just accepting somebody's word that they got a new puppy isn't confirmation that it's true. It is about saying, I'm willing to accept that based on this claim alone. I'm not willing to accept that somebody rose from the dead and is in fact divine and performed miracles just because somebody said so.
Okay, and so as it pertains, so you mentioned last time that it would be fine for the resurrection to happen once at a fixed point in the past. Do you still believe that? Because I was kind of like confused because it seemed as though you were asking for a posteriori evidence, like.
Well, I am, but so let's imagine for a second that a resurrection occurred at some point in the past. Mm-hmm. That alone doesn't mean that you cannot get enough evidence to confirm it. It may be that the nature of the claim and its distance in the past forever prevents us from being able to reasonably confirm it, but that's not necessarily the case. So the point of what I was saying was it's not necessarily impossible that merely putting something in the past or in the distant past makes it untestable. It may be other things about the claim that make it untestable.
So the thing that would make it untestable to you would be the fact that it's a supernatural claim, right? Like, would you say
No, because I don't know if it's a supernatural claim or not. So you might want to watch the debate that I did with Mike Licona because he basically spent the whole time arguing that reality apparently has a supernatural component, and this lends credence to the resurrection. And my point was, I don't have sufficient evidence to conclude that a resurrection in fact occurred. How, if I did, even if I were to accept, okay, Jesus was dead and then Jesus was alive. The how that happened, I still would have no idea. And whether or not it was supernatural or, an incredibly advanced technology or whether there's an utterly mundane explanation for it, I don't know. I'm not ruling something out because it's supernatural. The fact that people are asserting a supernatural cause for something puts it into the realm of untestable, or possibly even more untestable than it would be in a regular circumstances. Like,
Okay.
how do I tell whether or not George Washington refused to tell a lie about cutting down a cherry tree?
Well, I believe that would be, that would be historical investigation, which would require abductive reasoning.
Yeah. And so when we do that, do we think that George Washington actually cut down a cherry tree and refused to tell a lie about it?
Not necessarily. I mean, it would be, for me anyway, it would be determined by like who the witnesses were,
right,
what their proximity, was to the events, and
yeah, I would agree. And also, I would argue that we have really good reason to think those events did not actually occur. And I know some people have done some research showing how this story was likely invented afterwards. It doesn't matter that much to me, because maybe even if George Washington did chop down a cherry tree and then said, I refuse to tell a lie, even though it's extraordinary and it's mythic hero-making type stuff that we would normally look at and go, yeah, that shit didn't happen. Even if it did, it doesn't matter that much to me. The issue here is people are now saying that the reports of a resurrection that we cannot confirm or investigate are sufficient to base their entire view of reality and their lives around. That's not just, I'm kind of convinced. I don't view religious claims in the same ballpark as, maybe George Washington didn't tell a lie, maybe he did, who knows. It's something more significant than that. So the nature of the claim and its impact on the world, all of those things have to be considered. So
yeah, I agree completely.
If I told you that last week my uncle had a heart attack, was on the table, died, no brain waves, no pulse, and then a day later revived and walked out of the hospital on his own, would you believe that?
I mean, maybe not. It would kind of depend. It would depend. I mean, since I'm so close to the event, that would be kind of a situation where I'd be able to actually go and speak to him.
Yeah, but what if you couldn't?
Kind of be like a little bit different.
What if you couldn't investigate at all beyond my story?
Well, then I would apply the standard methods of investigating history. So I would look at the quality, the number of witnesses, what they had to lose by saying that it was true, or what they had to gain by lying about it, if it didn't actually happen, and what their worldview was, and sort of the external relevant factors surrounding the situation to make me determine, would it be, do you know your uncle very well? Is he somebody you spent a lot of time with, so there's no way you could be tricked if it was actually somebody else appearing? Yeah, and what if... It's like a polysensory kind of a thing where you actually could physically touch him and sit with him and talk with him and things of that nature. I get it, Matt, but what if instead of me telling you this story, somebody else that you've never met and don't know told you my story? And now you can't you can't talk. Close to you.
You can't. Well, you can't talk to me. You can't talk to them. You don't even know who the story is coming from.
Well, I mean, that's not really necessarily the case.
It is absolutely the case. It is absolutely the case with the gospel accounts.
With the gospel, yes, I agree that the gospels they are anonymous. I agree with that. But,
right. So if we toss out the gospel accounts, what's left?
Well, the thing is, I wouldn't necessarily need to know. I mean, if there was a sufficient number and quality of witnesses, then I wouldn't.
What is a sufficient number and quality of witnesses for a resurrection, and how does Christianity even come close to that?
Okay, well, so for me, I see that religious people tend to be very focused on eternity. They have, while they may suffer in this life for something that they believe, they will never do something to willfully interrupt their ability to, go to their version of heaven. That is absolute bullshit. That is one of the most bullshit things anybody's ever said. Have you ever told a lie? my point is, they're not going to say something is true knowing that it is false. If they're a devout religious person, they're not going to.
So religious people don't lie. Religious people don't lie is what you're saying.
No, not at all. That's not what I'm saying.
You just said they would not knowingly say something that wasn't true.
There's a whole category of lies called pious fraud.
But I'm not trying to suggest that they would never tell a lie in general. I'm saying that I do not believe that a religious person would knowingly invent a story that would offend the God that they still believe in on purpose.
Really?
Right. So that's kind of a little bit different. So, like, if I lie to my wife,
there's a lot of people in our audience
you
shaking their heads.
You don't think that lying to your wife offends God?
No, I'm sure that it does. I'm sure that it does. But
you don't think that in the entire history, and by the way, you're saying religious people, I'm assuming you're just talking about Christians?
No, my point is...
So no Muslim would ever lie in a way that would offend his God?
Not intentionally. So my thing is, he may tell a lie, right?
Okay.
Hold on. Can I finish?
No,
okay,
no, actually you can't. So this is a sticking point, Matt, because essentially, and I want to make sure I understand this, you're asserting that a sincere religious believer for any religion would never knowingly lie about that religion.
I'm saying that a devout religious person, right, if they knew that inventing a story, right, so if they knew that inventing a story would cause them to, for sure, not gain their eternity, they would not go out of their way to invent and propagate that story.
How about
I'm definitely going to go to heaven.
How about if they invented a lie that caused there to be more believers, an embellishment?
Like Eusebius.
Okay, but if the people who are inventing the story knew that by inventing the story they were robbing themselves of an opportunity at eternity.
Yeah, but if you get more believers, then that's good for God, right?
But
I find this.
Because why would they want to do that?
Why would they want?
Story that they would knowingly be offending the God that they still believe in. Is my point. So it's not as though an act of. Okay.
What you're doing is such a mix of absolute fallacies and absurdities that it's been difficult to latch on to it, because essentially in here somewhere is the no true Scotsman fallacy, that no true believer would ever knowingly lie in a way that might jeopardize their own salvation. But you also have this notion that if they knew that it was going to risk their salvation, they wouldn't do it. But under Christianity, you don't know that. No one knows but God who is or isn't saved, and God saves who he will and who he won't. And so if we can't even agree on what the criteria for salvation are, or whether or not salvation can be lost, because there are people who hold to once saved, always saved, if you cannot even get to a doctrine that is agreement, then what you have is a state of confusion where somebody would like Eusebius, who I would recommend you look into, knowingly commit a pious fraud because the ends leading more people to Christ and to truth and to salvation would justify the means, in the same way that a Christian mother like Andrea Yates would drown her children in order to, under her theology, guarantee their ascent to heaven, even if it meant damning her. And you seem to think that people who, even under your religious doctrine, are fallen creatures who are constantly subjected to sin would somehow never be dishonest about something when it comes to their salvation or putting their salvation at risk. And further, as the final note on this, I'm not asserting that the gospel authors were either true believers or lying. People can in fact be wrong and not lying. You don't have to go to they told a lie and were willing to die. That is a fallacy. Plenty of people have said things that weren't true and were willing to die for that because they sincerely believed it and they were sincerely wrong. None of this gets to, therefore, a resurrection is plausible.
Well, I'm aware of that, so I'm just trying to explain my side of the story. So I'm suggesting that, so Paul is a good example, or Peter or James. James being Jesus' half-brother, and he was the lead apostle of the Jerusalem church.
Yeah, and Voldemort.
Saying what I was saying.
And Voldemort was a Death Eater.
Okay, but James is actually recorded in Josephus as having been martyred around 62 AD. So he's corroborated an external source. But the point in what I was
there's a James referenced in Josephus, but Josephus is also there's also a forgery in Josephus as well.
Yeah, in the testimony in Flavian, but nobody really doubts the other part where James is actually listed, where it talks about his martyrdom.
Nobody doubts that was nobody sincerely doubts that wasn't something, or people accept that this is something that Josephus wrote. Whether or not holy shit, whether or not that is talking about the same James that is the same brother of the individual mentioned in the Gospels is not clear.
Okay. Still, my point is that they're the best friends and immediate family members of Jesus, right? Like,
I just pointed out that's not true.
Well, you didn't point out that it's not true because there's external corroboration.
No, I just pointed out that the external corroboration.
Calling it an interpolation. That is in the testimony of Flavium. That is not.
It's like you won't even listen.
I'm trying to listen.
No, you're not. You're not trying to listen, because when you try to listen, you shut the fuck up. What I'm saying is that when Josephus references James, it is not clear or demonstrable that the individual he's talking to is in fact the same James from the Bible.
Okay, I didn't want to interrupt you. Can I go now?
I don't know. Did you listen?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I understand that you believe that. Okay, and so fine. We'll table James anyway. Okay, we'll table James, and so somebody like Paul would be a good example. So
why?
Paul was, as you know, because Paul was, as we both agree, was I assume you agree that Paul was like he was known to be a violent opposer of Christians, and he was, about 2 years into a campaign to eradicate Christianity when he had an experience that he genuinely believed was an experience with the risen Jesus. And
no,
so I do not believe. So you don't believe that Paul? I'm a little confused as to what your view is exactly on that matter. Then.
Yeah. I'm fine with the notion that Paul had an experience that he's relayed to the...
That he believed was the risen Jesus, or no?
Possibly, yeah. That's the only thing that seems to make sense. The problem here is that Paul didn't know Jesus, never met him, and cannot be a witness to the resurrection.
Okay, well, I mean, for one, you can't really prove that Paul didn't know Jesus or wasn't in any way familiar with Jesus prior to, he could have been in Jerusalem during the.
You don't think that if Paul had met Jesus, shut up.
Say it one way or the other. Oh, sorry.
You don't think that Paul, if he had met Jesus while he was alive, would have mentioned this?
I don't know. Maybe not.
That's a load of crap.
He said that
That's a load of crap.
Boy, what a lot of tap dancing.
Maybe not. Hi, I'm Paul, and I've been persecuting Christians. And the other day, I used to be called Saul, by the way, but the other day I had this incredible encounter that I'd like to tell you about, which I'm convinced is the risen Jesus, who I met in Jerusalem many years ago. I saw him preach once.
My best bud. Yeah.
Anything along those lines. It is more absurd for you to pretend that maybe not Paul would have mentioned that he met Jesus than it is for you to suggest that sincere religious believers would not lie if they suspected that their salvation was on the line. When we talk about evidential criteria, it is funny to me that we talk about what humans would do. And Matt has this notion that humans who are sincere believers, no true Scotsman fallacy, wouldn't lie about things that would jeopardize their salvation, that there could be no justification for that there could be no confusion about salvation. And Paul clearly isn't going to lie. He believed it was the risen Jesus. Now, whether or not he was right or not is subject to question. Wouldn't it be nice if perhaps Paul had known Jesus prior? See, because what they want to do, and this is why I short-circuit this, what they want to do is say, we have all of this testimony from people who knew Jesus. Really? The Gospels are anonymous. Matt acknowledges that. So we have no idea if the authors knew Jesus or were relaying stories from people who knew Jesus, or if there was even a Jesus to know. Oh, well, all right, we'll set that aside and we'll go with Flavium Josephus's, or with Josephus's testimony about James, the brother of Jesus. Yeah, there's a problem with that too. How do you show that connects? Okay, we'll toss that out, and now we'll go with Paul. But Paul never met Jesus. But Paul thinks he met the risen Jesus. Okay, I know people who thought they photographed Elvis after he was dead. They sincerely believe it. I know people who have believed they've been abducted by aliens. If we're going to talk about epistemology, if we're going to talk about what makes a claim believable, and every time someone engaging in some skepticism and critical thinking points out a flaw in your methodology, if you either jump to something else, some other bit of evidence, and keep going like that, or if you want to suggest that you have a more reasonable account of human behavior, and your more reasonable account is that sincere believers wouldn't lie, you're going to lose. Yeah. I've been a sincere believer. It's human to lie. It is human to invent stories. It is human to want something bigger and better than us and to do whatever it takes to convince people of that. But if you come in saying, hey, I'm convinced that there's good evidence for the resurrection, you better come with more than somebody saw the guy after he was dead 2,000 years ago and I believe him, because that ain't enough. I don't know how it could be enough.
Well, the irony here is that he's a sincere believer, Matt is, but he's lying to himself.
That may be the case. I mean, I'm reluctant to ever assert that anybody is lying because I can't read minds until there's a demonstration that they've admitted that they knowingly, intentionally deceived. And this is where you get to.
Well, he's claiming to be a student of epistemology, but he's not applying it very well to his own beliefs.
he's not a student of epistemology. He called in previously and didn't know anything about epistemology.
Okay.
So I recommended he go study up on it.
Okay.
So in the past couple of weeks, I don't think he thinks he's become an expert.
All right.
But the one of the things that happens is it's a common, the die for a lie argument is what apologists will use. Well, all of these apostles and these people who were martyred, they wouldn't die for a lie. Well, first of all, that's not necessarily true. I am convinced that there are people who have died for a lie. The only thing that you need to do to get somebody to die for something that they know to not be true is to convince them that something better is going to come out of it. That's it. This is how the mind works. If I can come up with a rationalization, I can rationalize anything. I'm not a violent person. I have no interest in killing someone. But if you could convince me that killing someone would make the world the bestest place in ever, you might be able to get there. I'd like to think that you couldn't, but I'm fucking human. And I know that this is what humans do. I know that this is how they fall behind a leader. I know that this is how the Nazis built up they had Gott mit uns on their belt buckles and they're running around thinking God is on their side. I know that this is exactly what people do. Get yourself a bigger lie that diminishes the problem with the other one. And some people might argue, as I point out with Andrea Yates, let me drown my kids now so that they're going to go to heaven, even if that damns me to hell. And I would imagine that somewhere in the back of that twisted, perverted mind that led her to do that, not only is some doctrinal things about Christianity, but is the notion, maybe God will see that I loved my children so much I was willing to damn myself for eternity, and he will show mercy on me. He will recognize that this is the exact same love that he did. And if you begin going down that road, you can build up a story such that people will lie over anything. So if you're coming with, I believe in the resurrection because I don't think people would lie, you will make no headway here.